Hey, you're all set.
Hey, Ann. I will call the meeting to order at 5:36. This is a special meeting of the Plan of Conservation and Development Subcommittee, and we have invited the full commission for our presentation of the draft 2022 POCD. There's no members of the public, but I think I will read the video recording procedures anyway. This is a web-based call, so we are operating under the following procedures. Session is being audio recorded, just like every other Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Please be advised that today we're also recording the video of the proceedings. To ensure sound quality, the default rule for this meeting is that everyone will remain on mute. Commissioners and staff will generally remain on mute except when speaking or voting, and will generally be keeping video of themselves on. As I started to say just a minute ago, the purpose of this meeting is for the POCD subcommittee to present a draft of the 2022 POCD update to the full Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission, if the commission agrees that this draft is ready, we will schedule a public informational meeting and request written and oral public comments at that time. So tonight is really our chance to present our draft to the full commission and see what the comments are. We have a couple of housekeeping items. Mostly it's the approval of the minutes, but I think that I would look for a motion to move those to the end of the meeting or table them to our next meeting, because I'd like to have at least another member of the subcommittee present. So can I have a motion to table the approval of the minutes?
So I would move that we would table this until the next regular meeting.
Thanks, Wes. And a second?
Second.
Great. Thanks, Daryl. Mark, you were just close on both of those.
No, too slow.
So all those in favor, so signify by raising your hand and or saying aye.
Aye.
And motion carries. Great. And I don't think, as Wes said earlier, it's really an informational meeting. So until we vote, I don't think we need to do any elevating of members of the full commission. And we'll do that at the end if the commission wants to have a vote. So with that, I think that what I'd like to do is introduce Glenn Chalder, who is our consultant, the person who's helping us draft the POCD, and he'll carry us all the way through to adoption of the POCD by town vote, by town meeting, I'll say. And Glenn has been instrumental in getting us to this point, and he has agreed graciously to make the presentation of this draft to us tonight. So Glenn, with that, you're on.
Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. I'm Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. I've had a chance to work with Kent in terms of the update of the zoning regulations, and now in terms of preparation of an update to the Plan of Conservation and Development. The subcommittee worked on this through the fall and winter and put together a draft plan and refined that document, and we're looking forward to your comments and feedback. I think, as Matt indicated, our thought and suggestion is to continue to get feedback on this document, such as a public informational meeting at some time in the future, to then come back to the committee and the commission with any final tweaks or changes to the plan, and then be able to move ahead with that. The plan itself is laid out 6 major sections to it. The first of which is just an overview or introduction to planning related issues. Then there are 4 policy chapters dealing with major thematic elements of the POCD. The first is the concepts of sustainability and resiliency, and those are highlighted in this plan. They really weren't as prominent issues in terms of public policy in the 2013 POCD. There's a section on community assets like natural resources, open space, and what we call community character, development related topics, infrastructure, and then the last section is overall conclusion, if you will, and discussion about implementation and future steps. There is a description here in the beginning of the plan that we are trying to identify action steps and policies as part of this document. So you'll notice as we go through the various plan elements that a policy, which appears in these tables in the plan in black ink, is a general strategy of the community, but it doesn't necessarily involve a specific action step. It's more of an approach or a policy to review an application or to consider strategic directions for the community in the future. And those are in black. On the other hand, there are different strategies outlined in red, and these are particular action steps. So they may say things like adopt a regulation or change this or act on that. And so our goal in the future in terms of implementation would be to remember the policies and affirmatively move forward on the action steps, et cetera. And in this section, in all sections of the plan, leaders and partners are identified. So these are people that, entities, organizations that would be working on these items. So the approach for this really is sort of an action-oriented document overall. The first section of the plan, I will summarize. We'll see if there's any major comments, et cetera, on this section. Is an introduction. What is a plan of conservation and development? What's it about? Prior plans that the town has created over time that have created the Kent that community knows and loves today. The major strategic elements of the plan that I mentioned earlier. Information on the history of Kent that brought it to where it is today in terms of its historic development. And then some census information. During the preparation of this draft, we learned that the 2020 census results, which are normally issued in the spring, 2 years later, the Census Bureau called timeout on and said they will not have census data ready until next year, spring of 2023. So as a result, in the 2013 plan, we had a state of our town report, if you will, that set the stage for the Pocd. This one is using what's known as the American Community Survey, which is based on census estimates. So I just wanted to point out for the commission, we're using the best available data, but it's not as precise as we might like. And most of the information, demographic and other information in the plan from the American Community Survey can have a margin of error associated with it. So we talk here about Kent's changing age composition, the fact that the median age has risen quite dramatically since roughly around 1980. And the fact that in terms of years moved in, we continue to get have some longtime residents, but get new residents as well along the way. The economy overall, an overview of housing. The land use map is going to have a click link so that people could actually zoom in on their properties on a larger scale map. But for file size and other reasons, we'll keep it smaller in the document itself. And the same thing on a zoning map. We conducted a community survey as part of the plan preparation effort. Over 432 overall 432 responses were received during the survey. People identified the things that were important to them in their decision to live in Kent. Those included things like community character, housing type, value, town amenities, etc. Things in the community they were proud of or sorry about. And then we asked people to identify from a list of different strategy statements how well they thought the town was performing on these strategic approaches and how important they felt these strategic approaches were to the community. And then we divided the results up into 4 quadrants, things that were high importance and high performance, high importance, but our performance was below the average, and then things that were of lower importance, but again, where town's doing a good job on, and things that, again, lower importance or lower performance. And those results are summarized over here on the tables on page 16. And these results influenced our thought process as the elements of the plan were coming together. And so we also summarized what people identified as the greatest challenge or need. And if we could make one thing happen as part of this plan, what would that be? So that's the informational chapter up front to kind of set the stage for people, to introduce them to the plan, and lead into the strategies to follow. Any thoughts or questions on the first chapter?
Did you have any conversation about where there's like some what's the word I'm looking for here? Mutually disagreeable between importance on one piece or another. Like, for example, addressing sustainability, very important, but then specific things to address sustainability, like charging stations or pedestrian bicycles, listed as low importance. Like, is
Yeah, I
that?
mean, I think you have to take the survey results in a sense for what they are, that people react individually to the statements and don't tie them together the way that you just did, David. So the concept, I think, of sustainability is something that kind of resonates with people. But when you get down to some of the more specific aspects down at the bottom, for example, as you point out, vehicle charging stations providing for those, most people in this day and age don't drive electric cars yet. So they're not anticipating what the future is. And I think in situations like this, the commission and the community probably need to advance the conversation and discussion and say, we're preparing, this is a plan, we're preparing for the future. And that's one of the issues that we're going to address for sustainability reasons and important aspects of infrastructure overall. Anything else in terms of the introduction? And again, our purpose here tonight, I think, is to give an overview of the plan and hopefully get a green light to head for a public informational meeting to get community feedback and give people about a month, if you will, to review the document. Is the size of the presentation okay, or would you like me to go to a one-page view and blow it up a little bit, or is this okay for an overview?
It's fine for an overview.
Okay, thank you. So the first policy section of the plan is about sustainability and resiliency and becoming a more sustainable and more resilient community overall. So under the concept of sustainability, we talked about different elements of sustainability, different approaches related to sustainability. So there's certainly the issue of climate sustainability, and some people think that that's what sustainability is all about. This is about climate change, global warming, and similar types of issues. And so there's a discussion of that and some general approaches related to that. There's also the concept recognized in the plan of ecological sustainability, and this is much more granular and on the ground in Kent. But what does this mean in terms of the health of our environment here, in terms of water and water quality, and ecosystems, et cetera? And how can we live a greener, more sustainable life here in Kent? We talk about energy sustainability because, again, the focus ties into concepts of climate sustainability and other elements of sustainability, but how can we be more prudent in terms of resource use? Goes on to talk about social sustainability. The age demographics of our community are changing quite dramatically, but we aspire to be a community with a diverse mix of ages, cultures, and characteristics. And how can we do that to enhance and sustain the quality of life that we have in the community overall? And then also the concept of economic sustainability. Because of online retail, working from home, there have been some significant changes in terms of the way people interact with the community. And so we wanted to wrap all of these elements underneath this concept of sustainability so that we can adapt to these in the future and over time. The town is participating in the activities of an organization called Sustainable CT. And what they are doing is have identified a list of policies and strategies, and they encourage communities to take specific steps in different ones of these areas, depending on their unique characteristics and situations. and then they get recognition of different levels of sustainable CT, bronze, silver, gold, etc. Kent is a participant in this program and is working on different elements of this, and perhaps like most communities will continue in the future to act in this way and in this area. So here we get to our first strategy chart. I'm sorry, I have to zoom in here. So here we have an example of how these tables work. So again, the overall strategy here that we're in is enhanced sustainability. Little sidebar here says listen, policies or strategies anticipated to continue over time are identified by black text, and action steps, which are intended to be specific tasks, implement the plan, are identified by red text. So the Kent sustainability theme is considered to be the leader about educating residents about sustainability concepts. And then they're also being listed along with the Conservation Commission about developing and implementing strategies to become more sustainable in the areas that we mentioned earlier: climate, ecological, energy, social, and economic. And so these are specific steps, and hopefully over the course of the 10-year anticipated life of a POCD, these would eventually be implemented and could in fact be crossed off in the plan, whereas the black statements are likely to continue perhaps into the next POCD or even the POCD after that, because these are directions we would still want to move in. So that's again sort of the way the plan has been set up. I'm sorry about that. The second part of this chapter is about enhancing resiliency and becoming a more resilient community. This includes environmental events, economic events, and social trends that are going on to try to maintain and enhance the overall quality of life in Kent overall. The strategies, again, relate to keeping people advised and informed about the concepts of resiliency. Implementing the hazard mitigation plan is the action step that's most identified, but I think it's sort of a Boy Scout motto. The policies, in a sense, are be prepared, because the hazard mitigation plan points out certain events or activities, winter storms, wildfire, and other types of situations that can occur, and then also emergency preparedness. So that's an overview of chapter 2. Thoughts or reactions from the commission in terms of this chapter? Good for now?
Yep.
Usually takes me a little bit longer to put everybody to sleep, so that's why I was so surprised. Chapter 3 is the community assets chapter. Originally, we had called this conservation, but there's so much going on in this chapter. And I think for some people, this could be, as far as they're concerned, the most important chapter of the plan. I think there's elements in each of the chapters which are important, but this is certainly one that resonates with people. And as you can see here from this table, that when we ask people about important and performance, many of the chapters or elements in this chapter were very high on the list, ranked first, second, third, fourth, etc., in a number of situations. And so that's an indication, if you will, that how important these are to Kent residents. The first subpart of this is about protecting natural resources, continuing to protect natural resources. I think the review of strategies, regulations, and plans that the town has had, the town's been doing a very good job on this over the years. And so this map identifies the different soil types, which is the commission knows is the basis for residential zoning in the R1 districts, which is the vast majority of town. So this gives a sense of where the soil types are more conducive to development and where they're not. But it informs people in the community who might otherwise be unaware of the natural resources. The map, I think, is very helpful. I think it's also important to state that this is a fundamental difference from the 2013 plan. The 2013 plan had the maps in an appendix at the back, and those were actually online separate from the main document. And I think here we've decided to put the maps in line so that as you read the text, you can look at the picture. And I think the information now becomes a little bit more alive for people, and they can understand and have comments and input, if you will, on the various elements. So protecting natural resources was the first element that was listed. And certainly water resources are very important because of our reliance on groundwater for our water supply, public water supply watershed in the eastern part of town, floodplain areas and other things which are also important. And so that's highlighted as a particular component of the natural resources component of the plan. It also includes natural diversity resources. These are areas which are habitats for rare and endangered species where they have been seen in Kent. It can also include unique resources such as Kent Falls, because waterfalls are somewhat unique in Connecticut. So natural diversity doesn't always mean plants and animals, but it predominantly does. So we look at sort of North Spectacle Lake, for example. I just realized it sort of looks like a bunny rabbit, but this is an area, again, of some environmental richness in terms of habitats for different types of species, which are considered to be important. The strategies related to natural resources or continue to do a good job protecting these natural resources, continue to require the use of conservation development approaches for development in the R1 areas, which again are most of the outlying areas of Kent. Two specific recommendations, one about modifying the conservation development regulations to also add core forest areas and potential forest corridors as considerations for secondary conservation areas. Core forests are very important wildlife habitat areas. And another one also about considering adding a checkbox to the planning and zoning application forms for the applicant to indicate whether the property is within one of these NDDB areas. Once the commission knows that, they can decide if there's any action that needs to be taken. But if the commission doesn't know, then the commission wouldn't be in a position to take that action. There's also a section about preserving open space. This is an area which is highly valued by residents. It did very well in the survey, both in terms of importance and performance. So the overall recommendation is continue efforts to preserve more open space in Kent. It talks a little bit about sort of different categories of open space. Some of it is protected land, and that's land that we definitely have the most control over. But there's also areas which are undeveloped land, fields and forests that people see but are not protected. And just to try to make that point for people that we can't relax, if you will, in terms of our focus on open space because development may happen. Identify desirable open space characteristics for the commission to be able to use as a checklist going forward, and also identify some of the tools which have been used in terms of open space protection, encouraging philanthropy and grants and partnering with other institutions, and then also the regulatory approaches which the commission has used to preserve open space. We created a map of open space and protected lands. Let me just give credit here throughout the plan to HVA, Housatonic Valley Association, which has maintained the GIS information for the town for many years. And they've done a very good job, and we're able to use that information here and recolor it to identify and highlight certain things. And we certainly couldn't do what we've been able to do without their assistance overall. The overall strategies are continue to preserve open space, consider establishing a land acquisition fund so that we can put money aside as open space comes available. It could allow us to respond more quickly, look at possible modifications in the subdivision regulations related to open space to enhance our ability to protect these areas going forward, and also perhaps connect open space areas with trails and similar things. There's another section related to promoting farms and farming. We were able, based on David's comments, to actually make this map a lot better. When we started off, we were using the assessor's data, but turns out we're only capturing one field in terms of property which has been used for farm purposes or meets the state's criteria to participate in the PA 490 farm program. And so David had a question about, hang on a second, I think my land's not incorporated on this map. Why is that? We went back and searched the database and realized what was going on. So David, thank you for that observation. And this map highlights where these areas are, soil types which are conducive to farming, which aren't being farmed at the present time and perhaps could be farmed in the future, and then the overall strategies about promoting farms and farming.
Does the lack of red mean there's nothing new or no action steps to take in this case?
In this case, farms and farming are such a difficult element for the town to influence in a significant way. The zoning, Kent has got a strong agricultural history. The regulations, from what we see, don't inhibit farming uses and activities. We promote them. The issue, in effect, is the willingness of people to farm. So an action step here, you're correct, there are no specific ones. Maybe, corral people in the downtown area and tell them to farm would perhaps be one, or something else. So this is an area where if people do have suggestions as to how we can be stronger here, I think that could be very helpful for us overall. Oops, I'm sorry. Kent has a tremendous history, cultural resources, archaeologic resources in terms of things which have been found and discovered here, historic resources in terms of identified historic districts, Bull's Bridge, the Iron Furnace, the Philo Beardsley House, the Eric Sloan Museum, the Soldiers Monument. It's really, when you list them, you suddenly get a realization of the things which have happened here. And we wanted to identify those, including here on the sidebar on this page, additional resources which aren't reaching to the same level of state register of historic places or national register of historic places, still considered significant overall. And we've mapped those as well so that people can visualize and see some of these different areas. So for example, here in the southwest corner is the Shaggycoke Reservation. Things which are on the National Register, the state register, identified by these numbers so that people could identify them and go see them. The historic district in Flanders is recognized by both the red and the blue district. The difference between these two is that the red district is a regulatory district where property changes or improvements in that area need to get a certificate of appropriateness from the local historic district commission, whereas the larger blue area is on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's the general area of Flanders, which is one of the, I think it was in fact the first major settlement place in Kent, is a much broader area. This is largely recognition and ceremonial and contains really no restrictions on use of property, whereas the red area could. These other areas, based on information from the State Historic Preservation Commission, are areas with either historic resources have been found or conditions exist or existed, which were supportive of human settlement in earlier times. I should mention that this map and the earlier map on the NDD database, the resources are not in the center of these circles. In fact, what happened here is that a location is known by the state, but that information has been degraded by assigning a random distance and a random compass direction and then putting a circle on it. So you can't use these to go dig for Indian arrows, or you'll spend a long time doing it because the circles are actually quite large. But it starts to give you a sense of the location of known cultural resources in Kent overall.
A quick question.
Sure.
You've mentioned add a checkbox to the application forms, and I think there was another checkbox further up. is the checkbox strictly informational, or is the idea that we would have a checkbox to trigger some form of additional scrutiny for applications, like to the level where like the Horizon Line district has a bunch of extra checking? Or is this really just check and then we know, but it doesn't actually mean anything regulatory wise?
I think my view for the commission is that these areas, the checkboxes, so that for the commission to know. So that in the case of cultural resources, if somebody was proposing something in one of these red areas, you might ask, have you checked with the State Historic Preservation Office to determine if you're impacting that resource? Or have you any plans to do a pre-development archaeological walkover to determine whether or not there's anything there worth investigating? So if it's not marked, then we believe that the likelihood of an archaeological resource there is limited. So we wouldn't necessarily put a landowner through. But in some of these other areas, the landowner could do some investigation to understand what the sensitivity is. Then the commission can decide what, maybe an Indian arrowhead was found. Okay, so maybe we look to see if we find any other ones, or there could be something more significant. So I think in this case, knowledge that there's something going on there might be better than just bulldozing the regions. With recent state legislation, there was some concern that the phrase community character essentially becomes a four-letter word. And I think the overall result of the change in state statute was to prevent community character from being weaponized against certain land use applications. But I think community character is such a fundamental part of Kent and its history. The idea here in this section of the plan is to identify the things that we have that make the community special. And the words which are currently being proposed for use in situations like this is characteristics rather than character. And I think this is how we can continue to use that going forward. So we refer back to some of the historic studies that have been done for Kent, the things that people identified as being important, and particularly as part of the last POCD and work done by the Conservation Commission as part of their studies. They've identified different character areas in the community. They are numbered 1 through 23 in the current listing. And here they're identified as what they are. And in the text it mentions that, you can go back to the original report to find additional information about these. But because the nature of the resource is identified, such as a scenic area, an application could be reviewed as to whether or not it might negatively impact that particular aspect of this character area. This plan suggests 2 possible new areas for your consideration to include on this map. The first of which is number 24. It's called the Cobble, which is really Cobble Hill right here. It is the hill behind Town Hall and the town center area, and really sets the backdrop. If you think back to the cover of the plan, the cobble is off on the right-hand side, and it's what gives the town center its context and character. And if anything was to happen to that hillside, it would, have an impact on the community. It also has impact from the other side, from Cobble Road. It sets the backdrop to Cobble Road, which was originally the main travel road down to get to the then town center in Flanders. So that's being added here, or suggested for being added here. And this is again for the commission's consideration going forward. And the other thing that's also added in here is dirt roads. There are a number of dirt roads around Kent that add quite a bit to its overall character. Some people love them, some people don't, but they certainly, I think people can agree that they add to the character of the community. So I wanted to suggest to the commission that those be added to the list moving forward. Kent also is blessed with a wide variety of scenic resources, and we've attempted to map them here. We have scenic roadways in the community, but we also have the Housatonic River corridor and the inner and outer corridor. We have the Horizon Belt area. We have protected land and state parks. We also have Public Act 490 land, et cetera. But when you start to realize how many areas in Kent are colored because of their scenic resources and values, it starts to give the impression about how important these scenic resources are to the community. And then also undeveloped land, Public Act 490. So this is the different land categories in town, whether it's assessed as farmland, forest land, or open space land, or in case of yellow here, and again, thanks to David, properties which have multiple designations. PA 490 program, as you're perhaps aware, is a situation where land is assessed on the basis of its use. And so it isn't assessed on the basis of market value, because it's based on use, which is often farmland or fallow land. Its land value is lower, people pay less taxes, and it's more likely that the land will remain undeveloped for time into the future. This section also talks about the importance of building and site design. And then we have our strategic recommendations here in terms of character resources. Some of the action steps are identifying whether or not a property is in a town character area. So just so the commission is aware that that might be an issue for consideration, whether it might be worth considering adoption of a stone wall preservation ordinance, and then also take a look at lighting regulations, particularly with regard to the continuing transition to LED lighting, which has a very different illuminatory effect than lights in the past. So that's an overview of chapter 3. Thoughts or comments? Anything in here alarm people, or anything you think we've missed?
Glenn, I would make the comment regarding the maps that that while the maps are included in the book itself, there will be a link out to the real map, so they can be easily studied and zoomed into.
So I haven't mentioned that up front. I'll add that so that people know that that's can happen. Thank you, Matt. So that I may hold up on that note just for a little while, Matt. In other words, the map links to a larger scale have not been created yet. So we may hold up on that just for a little bit here.
That's fine. However that goes in, I just wanted to make the balance of the commissioners aware of the fact that that's, that as they go through this draft, I'm sure they'll notice that that the resolution isn't great, and when we've addressed that, or we're attempting to address that in the final document.
Thank you, Matt. The next major section.
Just real quickly, when you have something in the text, for example, or was it like the POC recommends that utility lines in Kent Center be put underground whenever possible, etc. Would that normally also end up in the 3.5 section? Or are there recommendations that are in the text that are not going to get called out?
I think it's specifically in the town center section, because it's expensive enough that that's the main area it's going to happen. We probably couldn't afford to do it elsewhere. So,
oh yeah, it wasn't about being in the town center. It's like, why isn't it in the table?
I think the issue was to try to say things one time and say them in the place most appropriate. If the commission edits or modifies the plans at time in the future, but there's conflicting facts on the same topic in different areas, we tried to get them all together and in the most logical place. Sometimes the recommendations in the plan can perhaps fall under different topics, so we tried to say it once. How do you feel about that? Does that sound like a reasonable approach, or should we?
I guess are all the recommendations in a table somewhere? Or
not yet.
Okay, but they will be? That's the goal?
I think our intention is to create implementation tables at the very end of this process. And that would be where these strategies get put into an Excel table, which is now allows it to be sorted by leader and partner and other variables over time, so that this might be considered, the Stonewall Preservation Ordinance could turn out to be a #1 priority in town. And we could sort by #1 priorities. Or it could be a #7 priority, in which case we could figure out what priorities come before that.
Got it.
So I think we talk about that when we get to the implementation section, because we want this to be a living, breathing document in terms of implementation moving forward.
All right. I guess as my general comment, I would like to ensure that anything that in the text which says the POCD recommends or suggests or whatever, that is there's a 100% coverage into the tables, which many people will probably focus on rather than having to skim through the text to find recommendations that maybe didn't get called out.
I think that's, yep, I think that's very important. So I'll make sure that make that happen.
Awesome.
Yeah. So there's a number of different types of verbs, but I think I can figure out a way to do that, and I'll take a shot at that. Chapter 4 is about development strategies, and this is about guiding development to make Kent an even stronger community. The first section here is about maintaining and enhancing Kent's Village Center. For people who have village centers, they don't always sort of appreciate them the way that people who don't have village centers are extremely jealous of them. And I have to say, based on my travels around the state, I think Kent has one of the best village centers in the entire state. So I think the concept here is to maintain and enhance the village center going forward, to make it and keep it as the heart and soul of the community in a vibrant, mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly area. So we wanted to put it up front here in the development section and focus in on a number of the studies that have been done historically, such as the streetscape plan, for example. And we expect to put click links here so that people can click out to these various studies to go see what they are and what they have to say. The Route 7 Scenic Corridor master plan from 24 years ago, but it really did also look at Kent Center and some of its opportunities, the incentive housing zone, which resulted in recommendations and zoning districts in the town center area to accommodate, promote mixed uses for the town center. We put together some principles and concepts that really enhance town centers and help them function effectively. These are things that the commission could use as part of special permits or in terms of other situations and scenarios to say, have you thought about this to an applicant, or could you consider doing that? Again, to try to strengthen and enhance the town center overall. We put 2 maps into the plan. They're the same geographic area. The first one is a larger scale, which puts the village center into context. We wanted to talk specifically about the outer gateway and the inner gateway and where we thought those could be. These are areas that you feel like you've entered another level of activity. What we found in the 2013 POCD is that some of these talks about gateways weren't well defined, so you didn't actually know where they were. You kind of had a sense, but this is intended to promote conversations and discussions in terms of those activities. And then on the other page is a focus now where we look in at the village core area. It suggests ideas in terms of possible trails or streetscape improvement areas, which the streetscape work is ongoing at the present time. Also opportunities for mixed use opportunity areas or housing opportunity areas, and possible road connections to create an integrated town center area. I think one of the things that might challenge Kent's Town Center a little bit is that the rail line does come through, and as a result, the Kent Green area, which is here where Town Hall is, and in the rear is essentially accessed from a very small piece of Route 7, and it feels a little bit like a cul-de-sac. The property owners have had some challenges in terms of renting some of the buildings which are more remote here because they don't feel like they connect to the rest of the town center. And these pink, whatever magenta, whatever color that we'll call that, is the possibility for some road connections within the town center area, possibly from Maple Street Extension or across the railroad tracks not all of these connections. We're not looking to create a grid system in the village, but a way for people to explore different areas on foot and on vehicle could confer considerable benefits on all parts of the town center area. And in the concept that a map is worth 1,000 words or a picture, we're hoping that this might promote discussion in town and in the commission in the future in terms of moving forward in some of these areas.
What is the adjective typical for?
I think where, are you looking in the text or on the map?
Inner gateway, outer gateway, typical.
Oh, I'm
It's a
sorry,
weird
that's what,
word.
okay, that's what this size of symbol represents. So a smaller one is an outer gateway and a bigger one is an inner gateway. But I guess that's a great observation, David. That may be just a little, it may not be, maybe it's superfluous wording.
All right. Yeah, it just has, I don't know if it was trying to make a point or not. Maybe it just needs to go.
Well, it's only that there are two symbols for the outer gateway which are labeled, and then two symbols which are not labeled. And similarly for the inner gateway. So everything on what we would say the east-west is not labeled, each one of those symbols, right? You can see that along 341.
So this
And
wording
then-
is often used. Oh, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to continue that along that same vein, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, and I think the word typical is used often on architectural drawings to indicate I'm showing it here, but it's really this symbol or this approach is also being used elsewhere. So it's a graphic convention, if you will. So I'll take another look at that in terms of whether or not to delete. We've got discussion here in terms of electrical vehicle charging stations. This is an opportunity area for the town. The state is moving in this direction. I think Kent is on a main corridor up to other parts of Litchfield County. So this is an area we could get state funding, ARPA funding, and other funding to move ahead aggressively in this area to strengthen our town center area. But there are some fundamental differences between level 1, level 2, and level 3 chargers. And so the question in a sense is, what should we do? How should we approach this? And then here for the town center area, the strategies do contain some more action steps in terms of specific things to accomplish with regard to revisiting the zoning regulations, completing the streetscape improvement project, and electrical vehicle charging stations, et cetera. The next part of the development section is guiding business and economic development. I think promoting local economic development, tourism, and visitation are important aspects of town, driven in part by the schools, but also the tremendous natural and cultural resources that are here, our cute town center. I guess I was surprised in the survey results, the number of people who find motorcycle noise annoying. But it's also a clear indication that people come to Kent because it's a beautiful ride. So the question ends up being, just being aware of these types of things and the fact that this does contribute to and enhance our economy overall. We felt that there's an undefined role in terms of economic development in Kent. The Chamber of Commerce kind of plugs away at it, but they don't feel like they get much support from the town. So what should we do? Should we establish an economic development commission? Should we support the efforts of the Chamber of Commerce? If we were, how would we do that? And so getting some clarity on this in terms of a strategic direction for the town is something the plan suggests. Plan suggests the importance, again, of home-based businesses and their importance of home-based businesses to Kent, supporting regional economic development initiatives. It's long been a policy of the town to continue to avoid strip development. And I think, again, the character of Kent and Route 7's character, the gateways and all the stuff are so important. It's important to mention in the plan to continue to avoid strip development. There are two areas that we thought some additional work effort might be considered by the commission in the future. The first of which is the industrial zone on Maple Street area. It's broken into two parts. The industrial A and the industrial B. And this is the only area in town which is zoned for industrial uses. And the question is, are we getting the most potential out of these properties? Are the development rules and regulations in place effective? The industrial B has lower lot coverage than is permitted in the industrial A. These are mostly town used properties, but are there changes that could or should be made here? The second area is in the Bowles Bridge section of town. The zoning map, there are a couple of different versions with different line locations. So it actually introduces confusion as to what property is in which zone. So the plan recommends that we go back, revisit that. The zoning district extends well back from Route 7. And so if this was a country inn in the back, that could work. If somebody wanted to try to put a retail use of some type or something else back here, that might have a different impact. So rather than be surprised when an application is presented to the commission, the plan recommends that we take a look at this and decide how we think we can address the development of this area most appropriately, and clean up the zoning map kind of while we're at it. And so these are the strategies for guiding business and economic development. And as I just mentioned, revisiting the industrial zone and the business hamlet zone to make sure we're accomplishing what we want to. Next section about guiding residential development is not finished at the present time in the following sense. Kent has good procedures in place for the residential zoning districts. We have the BR1 and BR2. We have the rural 1 and the rural 2. And the regulations are in place for those and appear to be working well. So we've also established a mandatory conservation development approach, which requires that there be a organic design-based approach to development of particular parcels. But the area where the plan is unfinished is the concept about expanding housing diversity and affordable housing. I have been in regular contact with Jocelyn, who's working with Kent on the affordable housing plan, and they are moving towards recommendations. They have an informational meeting coming up as well. And so their strategies are nearing completion. And the thought is that on page 72, 74, 75, we have the opportunity to incorporate recommendations to summarize that plan. I'm not sure that it makes sense to incorporate those strategies into this plan because this plan has a 10-year useful life, whereas the affordable housing plan has a 5-year useful life. And if they're both adopted in the same year, the next plan is going to be updated before this one is updated again. So I think the idea here is to support housing diversity, housing affordability, and refer to the affordable housing plan and support the strategic directions, but not necessarily incorporate it word for word. That's the development chapter. Thoughts on the development chapter?
I have a question regarding the housing plan. So I've heard it referenced to as the affordable housing plan, but I understood it to be a housing plan. Is there a difference? Should we be calling it a housing plan? Because it seems to me that affordable housing is a component of housing. And I just want to be sure that we are calling it, that we're being accurate in our description of that plan.
I think I've been following their work as well, Matt. Yeah, so it looks like their slides call it Kent Housing Plan. So
Yeah,
whatever.
so I can talk a little bit about it now, or I can address it later. I don't know when you wanted me to make the contributions. If you want to finish your work first, Glenn, I can bring everyone up to speed on where we're at with the housing plan.
I think, David, my sense is this is the right place in the POCD. So I think if you're comfortable doing so, I think now would be a great time.
Okay, sure. So I can certainly bring the rest of the commission up to speed with where we're at. We have been calling it a housing plan. specifically because we are addressing, or at least trying to address, a number of things about housing in general. It does, however, contain the necessary regulatory components specific to affordable housing, so it will reference both. And in our last meeting, we talked about the pros and cons of having it in the POCD, and I think we were comfortable that it made sense to maybe just have the POCD reference this particular plan, but not include it for the reasons that Glenn laid out, and that it was going to, the time horizon on it is different. We do have a set of a drafts or a set of slides for the feedback form on the 22nd. I was going to ask that Jocelyn send the planned version to the P&Z committee and commission, and try to get as many people present for the public meeting as possible, so we can get feedback from the commission that way, as well as Alice and I can bring specific feedback in. In the plan as it is now, it covers some of the same demographic information and also summarizes the responses to the various surveys and things that we've run as well, to try to put context around the plan. But we have settled on I think six concrete goals at this point, or yes, five goals at this point. So talking specifically about affordable housing, with some strategies about how we are going to expand and preserve the housing that's in Kent. We're talking about supporting affordable home buyer options, and this is a number of programs, either education, making people aware of things like the CT Housing Authority, USDA programs. I think there's a few other options we were looking at, one of which involved creating a town loan fund for down payment assistance. I mean, a number of things there. We do talk specifically about the Affordable Housing Parcel Program as a way to allow people who are earning 100% or less of the median income to be able to build a house on a lease. I'm sorry, on a leased property versus purchasing the property. There's some specific language about how we can increase creation of accessory apartments, or make accessory apartments easier to put in place. Things like parking, maybe thinking about adding or allowing additional accessory apartments in the rural zone in some cases. Specifically looking at reducing or eliminating short-term rentals in some cases. Fourth goal, looking at diversity of Kent housing stock. I think it's become very clear that the housing stock in Kent right now, almost 80% of it are large single-family homes, but only 15% of Kent's households have children. So we have this this mismatch between the housing that's in Kent for the most part, and for many of the people that want housing don't need houses that are as large. So there are some zoning suggestions. There are some options to consider different types of development in the housing overlay zone, and how we might encourage smaller or maybe different oriented homes for people that are either scaling up or scaling down their lives. And then some strategies around working with the volunteer or larger employees in the community to see what sort of things they might need to make more housing available for their employees and the volunteers that work for example, for the fire department. Glenn, I think you had picked out a few specific things that were of interest that might be interest of P&Z that we would need to ensure are aligned with the POCD or would appear in the POCD. I don't know if we want to call those out, but I should highlight the high level specific goal about affordable housing would have been to try to build 20 homes over 5 years that are affordable under the 830-J or G legal statute, to ensure that we can be at 5%, and then I believe that would let us apply for a moratorium if we had concerns about affordable housing development, bypassing zoning in some cases. So that's call it 4 homes a year for 5 years, or a ramp up, but I think that was the high level goal that we were leading with in the plan.
What's the timing, David, in terms of your, if I understood from Jocelyn, I think you have a public informational meeting coming up. I'm just going to say roughly in the next month or so.
Yep.
And then I think the
Second,
thought was that the committee might finalize its recommendations in the month after that. So by the end of July, we might have a endorsed document or,
yeah, so I think the goal was we were aiming to get it approved by the Board of Selectmen in a early September or late August meeting. So working back from that, probably in an August meeting for P and Z would be I guess Jocelyn said we would ask P and Z for an affirmation that the housing plan aligns with the POCD. The challenge is because the POCD is in flight. It's, we can't really, you can't say it's aligned with the current POCD, but I think the commission could say the housing plan as proposed is aligned with the POCD we plan on signing off for the end of 2022 or early 2023, so that the Board of Selectmen would feel comfortable signing off on it. So that means that the zoning specific changes, at the very least, I would hope would get some analysis after the June meeting, or part of the feedback for that meeting from P&Z if they have concerns. I have two hats on here. We have concerns, but then to try to have a draft plan, to go from the slides to the draft plan in July, and then a final plan in August for the town to then accept. And I believe we are hoping that the Board of Selectmen will approve the plan, but there's also the option, of course, of sending it to a town meeting, which I believe Warren, I think, shows that path. Jocelyn tells me all the other towns in Litchfield or in the northwest corner had the Board of Selectmen approve the housing plan.
I worked with some towns on these sorts of plans, and my experience has been either planning and zoning commissions or boards of selectmen or town council. So those are the primary choices. Yeah. I'd like to suggest it almost seems a little bit like the two commissions are working, sort of dancing around each other just a little bit here. And so what I'd like to suggest for the commission's consideration, if you're okay, is that I think the affordable housing plan is far enough along that I would like here on page 74, 75 to carve out a whole page here to summarize the main recommendations from the housing plan, the strategies that go along with that. And then I think we can state in general terms that the plan supports these directions and initiatives. And if the plan changes, we can, have symmetrical language, but not necessarily identical language. And that sort of avoids a situation that, maybe the committee's waiting for the Planning and Zoning Commission to act, but the commission's waiting for the Housing Committee to act. I think if you'll allow me to take a shot at incorporating at a higher level what their recommendations are, that would allow us to advance the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I would suggest that happen after the 22nd meeting, so that if we have any significant feedback that affects the plan at that point, that we adjust for it. I don't feel like we're going to see a lot of changes at this point, but if we have a meeting and we have 40 of 45 people saying that they hate one particular idea, we might want to at least reconsider whether or not it should be part of the plan. But I would say the strategies that we are at now are fairly stable. I don't foresee the committee itself making any other changes other than with either P&Z or town input at this point. So.
Yeah. So I think there's two choices, David. One of which is that I think at a high level view, if something changes as a result of your public meeting, we can certainly mention it at any public meeting we have that has been edited or deleted. We can certainly be symmetrical there. I think waiting till after your meeting sort of leaves this gaping hole in the plan. So I'd like, if the commission is comfortable as part of our work here tonight, to say, take a shot at it in terms of integrating. It's a draft, and if we're not wild about it, we'll tweak it later.
Yeah, I guess that's true. They are both drafts, so yes, that should be fine because we'll have additional opportunities to adjust in July, it sounds like, if not sooner.
I guess I don't understand what the chicken and egg issue is here. I mean, we're creating this plan of conservation and development, and the idea has always been, as far as I'm concerned, that the plan of conservation and development will reference the forthcoming housing plan. Is that not correct?
I think that's correct, Matt, but the affordable housing plan needs to be finalized before the POCD is finalized. So it's kind of hard for us to ensure we are in alignment with the POCD when the POCD is not done yet. So,
But you don't have to be. That, I guess that's my confusion. I don't, and I would really like to insist on calling it a housing plan and not an affordable housing plan.
yes, did I say affordable? I said housing plan, I thought. We are calling
So,
it a housing plan. Yes.
okay, all right, good, all right, good. And I'd like to reference that. I'd like for the POCD and the conversation to reference the housing plan.
Yes. I guess
and-
as long as like we're going to finalize a plan, and as long as P&Z does not then say, well, actually that plan you just finalized is no longer in alignment with the POCD because we changed our mind in October, that would be the problem we're trying to avoid. I think we're all working together, and Glenn and Jocelyn are guiding things along nicely. I don't really think that's going to be an issue, but that was just the one thing we wanted to avoid, was us potentially finalizing a housing plan and then having P&Z find that there's a piece of it which is not materially aligned with the POCD, which is coming. That's the only thing that we want to make sure doesn't happen.
Is the only reason that, I'm sorry, Glenn.
Go ahead.
Is the only reason why you are saying that you want the housing plan to be aligned with the POCD because the POCD is being written now? Because what are other towns doing when their plan of conservation and development is not being written now?
Yeah, well, normally there is a POCD that we are writing towards, or that the town would reference when they look at the housing plan. But so if you were writing the housing, if you had started the POCD in 2023, we would be referencing the current POCD, and we would come to zoning and say, here's our housing plan, and you would look at the POCD and say, yep, you're basically on track. But it's because it's being written, we're co-writing at the same time that you don't have a fixed point yet that we're making sure there's alignment against.
All
and
right,
we
so I
obviously
think
don't want to reference the last one.
I think the timing for the commission moving forward would be that if we have a public informational meeting, let's say at the end of June, we would get together sometime, let's say end of July, or just call it end of July, and finalize comments. And if the commission at that time decided to set the public hearing for adoption, they couldn't do that under state statutes till the end of September. State statutes for a POCD require a 65-day notice period. So I think if the commission will authorize me to go ahead, take a shot at merging the strategic recommendations, mark it as draft. If it changes over the next 30 to 60 days, then we're going to be able to edit that and then move forward with it. And even if it changes when it gets to the Board of Selectmen, our plan is still open, if you will, until the public hearing date of end of September. And we can make a change at the end. So I think rather than wait and look at each other, I think let's try to bring them together and then manage that through the adoption process of both documents, because I think our goal is to make them consistent. And right now it seems that the work that the committee has been doing is consistent with the directions that the plan recommends. So I'd like to take a shot at it.
That sounds great. I wholeheartedly support that. Do we need a motion for that, or do we just need Matt to say sounds good?
Matt's looking out the window.
I have another question. That at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, I thought that Jean said that the housing plan wasn't going to be done, but she communicated to the OPM that it wasn't going to be done until November.
We're expecting to be done before that, I think. At the moment, we're working back from an August or early September completion date.
Okay.
And to answer David's question from before, I am perfectly happy to follow the recommendations of our consultant.
Perfect. Moving on in the POCD, the next chapter, section 5, is about infrastructure. Infrastructure is a term which describes services and facilities which are important to the other elements of the plan and important to the community overall. So it includes things like community services, community buildings, vehicular transportation, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and also utility infrastructure. In terms of community facilities and services, most of the facilities are in and near the center of town. Again, the goal is to provide for appropriate facilities to meet community needs. We went through a process of evaluation of the facilities, and generally speaking, think of it a little bit like a traffic light in the sense that green means we expect this approach to be adequate for the planning period, which is roughly the next 10 years or so. Blue indicates that there's some issues that may need to be considered. And then the maroon color is we're a little bit concerned about the ability of this facility to meet needs during this period. Generally speaking, we're getting blues and greens across the board. There are some scenarios, taking the first one up here on the top left, for example, at Town Hall, there are some space constraints such as for storage. Do we need to do any sort of expansion or modification to the building? No, we don't need to do it, but it might enhance the utility of Town Hall and some of the services if we were to. So as a result, we have a constraint. It's not earth-shattering, so it ends up in a blue. Green, for example, in terms of, let's say, Kent Center School, a regional high school, appear to have adequate capacity to meet community needs. We don't actually get into the student-teacher ratios and the other things. Those are the responsibility of the Board of Ed within, and those are generally greens. The Kent Memorial Library is undersized for a community of Kent's size. It's an important building in the town center. They've undertaken a capital campaign to improve that building. We think that that's in the recommendations an excellent suggestion. The fact that it's going to remain in the town center drives traffic to this area, so we think that's a positive. So we're optimistic that the maroon following completion of that project will be removed. We weren't quite sure what to do with parks and recreation. It came up in the survey that people were concerned about some of those facilities and services. They've been in the process of preparing a master plan for quite some time. There's a new director in place, and we're hoping to get feedback at our public meeting as to whether or not this is more significant or serious and should be a red, or whether blue is the appropriate designation. And at one point in time, we even talked about a half of red and a half of blue on this one. But those are the main community facility needs for Kent for the next 10 years overall. Another important issue is the concept of volunteer participation in recruitment. I was out taking pictures one day, or this is a picture I think maybe from Google Street View or whatever, and there's the sign that said, members are wanted for the volunteer fire department. So communities basically work because of the volunteers, such as yourself, and this is an important consideration going forward. The main recommendations in here in terms of action steps are look at space constraints at the Public Works facility, complete the Parks and Rec master plan. The library is not specifically called out here as a red because the Library Association is taking on this work. And so the recommendation here is work with the Library Association to complete their goals. Next major section is about roadway circulation. It's probably fair to say that most of the major roads that Kent will have are probably in place already. We're not about to cross the river with new bridges and other things like that. And so managing this roadway network effectively is going to be something important for the town. Some of the roads are more major in terms of a traffic function, and those are identified as sort of arterial and collector roadways for the state. Those are the reds and the blues. And then there are other local roadways, the greens and the purples, which serve important local functions. The yellow areas are scenic roads. Not actually seeing that in the legend. We've had that, so I'm just going to make a note here. And the orange areas are areas of higher accident incident potential based on accident statistics. Includes the section of 341, the steepest hill, if you will, going down and coming up, certainly in the wintertime. Section of Route 7 from the town center north to Flanders, and also the monument in the center of the roadway apparently confuses people from out of state. And so we can have issues and challenges there as well. Plan points out the importance of trying to continue to fund roadway maintenance on an ongoing basis. Sometimes in budget crises or difficulties, it's easy to cut road funding, thinking that the roads will still be there next year, and that's true, they will be. They'll just be in worse condition, and that costs money to fix. So spending money up front to extend the life of the road is a lot cheaper than waiting to the end when it falls apart. And continuing to recommend the town work on that. Plan promotes pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. Realistically, public sidewalks are predominantly going to be in the town center area, some private sidewalks as well, and limited outside of the town center area. And that's this red area here on the map, the sidewalk priority area. The state has investigated bicycle circulation routes along with the Housatonic Bike Trail and other areas within the community. And there's been continuing discussions about improving the rail line and improving the rail station for passenger traffic. And so the plan supports and recommends that as well. There's also a discussion of utility infrastructure, both in terms of the water supply in the village center area. There's adequate capacity to meet future needs. Sewage treatment is a delicate situation in the sense that we have permitted capacity up to 142,000 gallons a day. We're currently averaging about 75,000 gallons a day. So there's almost twice as much capacity in the plant. The challenge we have is that some of the facilities at the plant are in need of replacement. As a result, there may also be permitting requirements that go along with that. Kent has one of the only ground discharge sewage treatment plants in the state of Connecticut, and that is generally not something which is desirable for the future. So it's allowed to continue to operate because it's there, but it would not be permitted if it was a new request. And there may come a point in time in the future where the state may require that the plant be converted to a water discharge, which would result in a higher level of treatment. So it's just an issue to be aware of. We have capacity, but there may also be some financial obligations there in the future. Storm drainage, there's a greater interest in terms of low impact drainage approaches where we try to replicate the natural water cycle. In years past, we used to kind of collect rainwater and try to discharge it as quickly as possible. That depleted groundwater supplies introduced pollutants into major water courses. And so we're taking a more natural approach. That's reflected in the zoning regulations, and the plan supports that as well. The thoughts about electricity, again, it appears to be fine in terms of capacity, et cetera. In terms of wired communications, there was some frustration expressed in the survey about the lack of broadband capacity, particularly now as people are working out of their homes more, and that capacity is more desirable for them. So the plan recommends that perhaps Kent consider being proactive in this regard and find ways to promote high-speed, high-capacity broadband service for all parts of the community. Some frustration also showed up in the area of wireless infrastructure in terms of the inability to make or receive cell phone calls in certain parts of town, dead spots, if you will. This map from the Connecticut Siting Council in the green shows areas which enjoy good cell phone service. The gray areas are areas which are expected to experience improved cell phone service as a result of a tower being built here in the eastern side of town. But as you can see from the white areas, there are still going to be considerable gaps, particularly along Route 7 and some other areas. People express some frustration about this. So the plan again also recommends being proactive, possibly working with private providers to identify possible locations for cell phone towers. We did add in some possible telecommunications policy considerations, which is to recognize and enable cellular communications because it's just a fact of modern life, and to try to find ways to accommodate this in the least visually intrusive manner. And then also a list of possible siting principles that could be used to inform providers and the siting council. There are certain locations or resources or other things that we would like to try to avoid or minimize those impacts if to the extent possible. I think, just making a note here. And again, the action chart here at the end in terms of strategies and action steps. Any thoughts or feedback on chapter 5?
Did in the plan anywhere do you address, I use the term Uber generically, but the availability of last mile services for people coming from rail? Just because that's a common question we get both at the brewery and the inn.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think the issue is the rail service in terms of passenger rail service is some years out. So the question in a sense is, what would we do from that point forward? So the question is, do
For
we,
people coming to Wingdale actually, or people who don't want to necessarily have a car? I just don't know if that's in the realm of the POCD or that's just life in Kent.
maybe life in Kent at this point, David? I can't think of a good way to address that. I think if it's an integral part of our transportation system and network, what is the town's role in that? So I think the private market, the cost of entry to Uber and other things may not be that significant. So the private market could respond better and faster. I'm not sure that there's much that the town could do to require or facilitate that. If we ended up with a train station in town, I think, we'd want to consider making arrangements for queuing areas for vehicles or other things like that, but we're sort of not there yet. And it's possible the train station could be located, on the north of where it is today on the other side of Route 7. So we've got to figure that out first, I think. Anything else on chapter 5? But chapter 6, I think, is pretty straightforward. The overall desire is to implement the plan of conservation and development. The state requires we do evaluation for consistency with state and regional plans. We have done so. And also in terms of consistency with state growth management principles. And again, we're consistent with those strategies as well. In terms of implementation, what we talk about again is moving ahead with the policies and the action steps. And we're hoping that by identifying the leaders and partners and also by creating the implementation tables, we're going to be able to set the stage for implementation in the future. Just making a note to myself here. And so that's summary of chapter 6 overall. I think the note that I was making to myself there, I think, is the idea that I think David brought up earlier about wanting implementation tables at the end. And I think what I'll do here is add more text in that identifies that as being an important outcome, if you will, from this process. So anything on chapter 6 or anything else on the plan?
Hold on, sorry. I think that we should make a note regarding David's comment about, what'd you call it, David? Last mile transportation?
Yes, last mile transportation.
Only because, there's a couple of sections in here that talk about the importance of transportation. and regional transportation, I just don't know where it fits. You know, we've got the infrastructure where we talk about provide safe and efficient vehicular transportation network that meets the needs of the community. And it seems to me that maybe part of that network is getting around without your own vehicle. But again, I don't know how to address it, but I think it's an interesting concept. If the train does come, I mean, like David said, the train is pretty close. And I know that there is taxi service in Wassaic, and there's taxi service at Harlem Valley, but there's definitely no taxi service that originates from here.
Yeah, definitely pretty slim.
Yeah, but in both of those places, it exists, but it's I think it's Danny and his cousin. Okay, so that's all. That's my only comment, Glenn. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, what was the station again in here? Woodsack?
Harlem Valley, Wingdale, and Wassaic. Yeah.
And there's the 10 mile too, but that's I mean, the 10 mile is the closest, but it's the most rural, the most remote.
So what I'm looking at here is the conversation. I'm thinking about the space on the page that discusses the rail and rail stations, and just adding a sidebar there that sort of describes this issue. Is that it is an emerging issue for additional consideration, and it's a way for us to be a greener, more sustainable community in a sense, and to meet community needs. And so it kind of blends a lot of different things together. And I may refer to it as sort of, you know, the last mile traveler or something like that. That's the issue we're dealing with. You got planes in New York, trains up the Hudson, and the issue is then, okay, what do you do on that last little bit? And to be receptive and considerate. Perfect.
Otherwise, I really appreciate all your walking through all of this. I have not been shy or parsimonious in my comments, so thank you for answering them all. But it's nice to see the document come together at this scope already.
Thanks for your comments, David. So I think if the commission's comfortable, Matt, we had talked about the idea of a public informational meeting sometime around the end of June. That would give me an opportunity to make the changes we've talked about here tonight, to issue a revised plan to be posted on the town website, and then I can work with Donna to try to get the word out for people so that they would be aware of this meeting. I get the sense probably we're still looking at a virtual meeting. Is that the best way to do this? What are you doing for the housing plan, David?
We're going to do another Zoom meeting, and we'll use the online voting technique to gather feedback.
Yep.
Jocelyn's got, I think, 10 or 12, well, maybe not quite that many, 5 or 6 questions posited that'll be set up as a poll that people will be able to offer their opinions. I think that actually works pretty well as a structured format for getting feedback, because it's much easier than having people come up and speak, which a lot of people are less inclined to do in a big meeting.
And yeah, for Donna, I mean, Donna has said enough times that even though we are allowed to do a hybrid meeting where we meet in person and then record the meeting, that we just don't have the technology that makes that a seamless process. So it's not a great, a hybrid meeting is not a great platform for public comment. So I think that at least my vote would be to have this public informational meeting via Zoom, but I would defer to the balance of the POCD subcommittee to weigh in.
Just as an FYI, we did meet with someone today about the setting up of that room. We discussed the layout, the equipment that's going to be needed, where things are going to be placed. But he couldn't really give us any kind of timing as far as when he was going to have everything set up. So I think I agree that with the June meeting, we should go ahead and keep it as a Zoom meeting.
As an aside, Donna, are you comfortable with the the plan for the layout of that room and how that room is going to be used by the land use commissions?
Yeah, I mean, that was why they included me in the discussion today. I met with the technician that's going to be setting everything up, and we talked about the different types of equipment, how things are going to be used. There are going to be 2 televisions in there. There's going to be at least 2 microphones, 2 speakers, possibly 4. The room is going to be reconfigured a little bit as far as how the tables are set up. There's a possibility that we might be using individual computers, but we're not sure about that yet, laptops. We met with the guy from Yucatec and also with a representative from Logitech via Zoom as he was explaining the specifications of the equipment.
Okay, thanks.
And we don't
So-
know how long it's going to take. So I would much rather go through a meeting after it's done with just you guys than try to do a public informational meeting on the plan of conservation and development the first time in that room. If it's ready. I don't want to, I'd rather do Zoom.
I agree. Karen or Adam or Mark, as members of the subcommittee, how do you feel about that format?
I'm fine with it.
I think the Zoom meeting is fine for the next step of this. I mean, as long as we give it lots of notice if someone wants to join us and, hear what we've been doing.
I'm good with the Zoom meeting. We've been doing it all along. I would love for us to get back to in-person meetings, but it doesn't have to be now.
Okay, good, thanks. So before we go further, I'd like to sort of canvass the balance of the commission, the whole commission, as to whether you all think that you all accept the recommendation of the subcommittee that we move to a public informational meeting in about a month. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I've got a thumbs up from Daryl. I know Mark and Karen and Alice is waving. David, you think we're ready for that? And Ann, I think that I saw you waving in affirmative. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's everybody on the call. So when we spoke the last time we got together as a subcommittee, we highlighted, we earmarked, and I think we talked about this at our last regular commission meeting, the 30th of June to get together. Does that ring a bell to everybody?
Yep.
So, I think that we should call a vote of the regular commission. I spoke with Wes about this before he left. There were a full commission of members, but Wes is gone now. So I would, with the consent of the balance of the commission, I would elevate Ann to voting status. And then,
Can I just make one suggestion?
sure.
Since you're an alternate, I think maybe what we should do in Wes's absence is add him in there as the vice chair to run this portion of the meeting and ask for the vote of the regular commission members.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's better, Donna.
Okay.
So Adam, I'll turn the balance of the meeting over to you, okay?
Okay.
So
So
we're
then
going to
I
elevate.
think we need somebody to make a motion for that, if that's the case.
Right. Well, you
Somebody,
can elevate Ann as
Oh.
vice chair.
well, why don't I elevate Ann and Matt? And
Okay.
and then Matt, you could make that motion.
Okay.
So as a point of order, are we allowed to elevate to more than the total number of members? I was always under the impression that we elevated up to 7.
I'm just counting to 1, 2.
So I think that's right. And I prefer that you elevate Anne for this, only because she's a voice that was not part of the POCD.
Okay.
Then you're unelevated, Matt. And I still need somebody to make that motion so that we can discuss it and vote on it.
And all the elevation and de-elevation, I think I lost track of the motion. This was a motion for to have the conversation or have the public meeting as a
This is the
full-
motion to have the public meeting on June 30th. June 30th was the date that we had talked about in the POCD meeting, and it worked for
Great.
Glenn and it worked with Donna, and
So
and
I
the
will move
timing
that
seemed
we
to be
have
good.
I'll move that we have the public meeting on June 30th.
And just, you know, that's a Thursday night, June 30th,
At 7.
7 o'clock.
7
PM.
o'clock.
Okay.
Any discussion about that?
We need a second.
I seconded it.
Thank you, Mark.
Any discussion about that? Does that not sound good to anybody, or in which case then I'll call for a vote. If everybody could say yes or raise their hand, that would be great. And that motion carries, and it looks like we will have our public information session on Thursday, June 30th at 7 p.m.
And we will ask how are we going to convey to the stakeholders that now is the kickoff for them to start to review the draft and to come to the to that informational meeting with questions or with written comments prior to.
Anna, I think I think you know who the various stakeholders are, and I think that if we send an email or a notice to the chairs of those commissions or to those various stakeholders to inform them now that we have that our POCD draft has been accepted by the P&Z, and that they should review it so they can give us comments at the June 30th meeting.
Well, I think if I work with Glenn and work with Darlene, we can get the draft up on the town's website, and we can put a blurb on the town's website about the fact that, you know, the draft has been accepted. We're going to have a public informational meeting via Zoom on Thursday, June 30th at 7 p.m. If you're a stakeholder, you want to make copy, and then I can always send an email separately to the stakeholders if you want me to do that. But you know, there'll be two different forms of notification, because whenever anything new gets put up on the town's website, there's a notification email like that gets sent out to people. So
I think it's worth, unless it's hard to do, I think it's worth letting letting those stakeholders know directly, you know, the different, whether it's the Conservation Commission or the other commissions that would want to weigh in, and the various land trusts and other parties that really are our partners in this. It'd be good for us to let them know now and not have them miss it and find out, you know, a week before, when they'll look through it more carefully than some other people may.
I'll send it to each chair of all the different stakeholders.
I think that's great.
Yep, no worries.
And then maybe we could ask Darlene, Donna to ask Jean to put it on a newsletter that comes out. So I suspect that we're coming out with a new newsletter relatively soon, right? The beginning of June, I think that comes out first few days of the month.
Usually, maybe.
I'm not answering that question.
Well, let's, maybe put it on on somebody's radar that hopefully that can make it into the newsletter.
I'll talk to you, Darlene.
Awesome.
And do we have any other, there's really no other business at this point.
Other than I need to extend the formal invitation to remind all of you that the housing plan meeting is on June 22nd, our public meeting, and you should all be there in your regala.
June 22nd.
June 22nd. Wear your fancy hats. It'll be on Zoom.
At what time?
Yeah.
I can't tell you because my mouse died and now I can't click on anything. So,
Can you shoot me
Alice,
an
do
email
you,
and let me
do you know what it is, Alice?
Oh,
Donna, at some point, can you send everybody the commission email letting them know the date and time of
I
that?
could figure. There we go. I got keyboards. Let's see. I gotta figure out how to get to the right window.
This is it. Donna, mute him so that he's got to figure out how to unmute himself first.
I don't think I could unmute myself either. I'm trapped.
I'll find out.
Donna, I will have the draft plan for you as quickly as I can. I'll also prepare some PR materials, which you could use as posts around town hall or email out to people and sort of other stuff to help this along or anything else. So hope to get that for you before the end of the week. If not, you'll certainly have it on Tuesday after Memorial Day.
That's good. I'm off on Friday, so if you want to just shoot for Tuesday.
I know I won't be able to get to it tomorrow. Well, but I'll get it to you as fast as I can, Tuesday latest.
Tuesday's good.
Thank
Do
you.
we need to discuss how the format of this meeting is going to be, or not really? It will,
I think that's
and Glenn will kind of take over and run that.
I think if it's okay with the commission, I think that I would go through the plan at a much higher level than we did today. I think today was to get the commission comfortable, if you will, with the nature of the recommendations and to find that we're ready to move to the public informational meeting. But I think a very high PowerPoint to kind of identify what's changed since the last plan, what are the major strategic directions in this plan, and to provide enough information that people feel that they can give us comment on the plan moving forward. This is not the public hearing on adoption. The actual public hearing won't occur until maybe September or October, depending on what happens. But it is going to inform people about the nature of the plan and strategic directions, and they can give us feedback. So I would think maybe 15 minutes max at the beginning to set the stage and then open it up for public comment. I think that would work well.
I have a question. After this meeting, when we've heard the public comment and gotten information from the various stakeholders, then is it the POCD commission or the entire commission? Are we going to, I should say the POCD subcommittee or the entire commission, are we going to have a meeting and discuss what of the comments and what of the information that we got at that meeting we're going to add or change or modify or not utilize in the POCD?
So my thought would be that I feel it's my job on your behalf is to make note of the comments that are received. So I'll either take them live at the meeting or listening to the recording later, put together a list and organize the list based on sections of the plan. So if one person says go north, another person says go south, you'll see both of those comments together and maybe you decide to stay right in the middle. If we use a subcommittee and then full commission process, that's 2 meetings to get to the point where we schedule a public hearing for adoption. Or if it's the commission as a whole, then that's 1 more meeting. So it's really up to you as the commission, how you want to approach that. I think Donna and I will focus on getting us to and through the 30th. And maybe the commission members either tonight or at another meeting can talk about, how you would like the sequence to go from here.
Okay.
Sorry, we really should decide that after we see how heavy the public comments are. If they're light, we can probably do it in one meeting. If they're heavy, it's probably take two.
That's a good point, Mark.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
David found his microphone again.
God never actually muted me, so
You're a lucky
Happy
man.
Memorial- happy Memorial Day coming up for everyone, though.
There you go.
Have a nice
Yeah.
time.
So, thank you, Glenn. As always, did a really nice job.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
At all.
Thank you.
Good
Good night,
night.
everybody.
Have a good weekend.